Even if you do not recognize my face, many of you have probably heard of me through my works and legacy. My name is Harriet Beecher Stowe, and I was born on June 14th, 1811, as the seventh of 12 children. My father was Lyman Beecher, a revivalist of the Second Great Awakening. In fact, it was after listening to one of his sermons at age 13 that I had a heart conversion and committed myself to the Lord. Even as a young girl, I loved to write and debate, later growing my skills by attending Hartford Female Seminary in 1824. As I grew up, I became a teacher there, proving myself to be a talented author and educator. When I was 25 years old, I married Calvin Ellis Stowe, a professor of theology, and ended up having 7 children. We later moved to Florida, where I wrote my most famous work, Uncle Tom's Cabin, or Life Among the Lowly. I wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin in 1852 as a way of protesting against the horrors of slavery. This practice was a part of life, one that some saw as necessary and invaluable. However, I had seen firsthand the abominations of the practice through my contact with the Underground Railroad, a network that helped slaves escape to freedom. Even though I was helping in this way, I saw the need for a greater impact. Uncle Tom's Cabin was my answer. There is more done with pens than with swords, I said, to display my belief in the power of words. In Uncle Tom's Cabin, I attempted to publicize the atrocities of the slave trade by exposing my readers to the horrible conditions slaves were forced to accept. Uncle Tom, one of the main characters in the story, eventually dies through the abuse of his cruel master, Simon Legree. This was a very common occurrence. In fact, this book was based off the real story of Josiah Henson, an escaped slave who became a Canadian pastor. However, many people in my time refused to accept these injustices, preferring to think of slaves as objects instead of people. This was the very issue that I attempted to address through my book, people's ignorance and unbelief in a topic that was very real and current. I could not have imagined the impact that my little book would have. It spread with incredible speed. Besides being one of the most influential books in abolition, it also became the best-selling book of the 19th century, second only to the Bible. In fact, Uncle Tom's Cabin sold 1 million copies before the Civil War even began. When I visited President Abraham Lincoln during the Civil War, he greeted me with these words, "So you're the little woman who wrote the book that started this great war." Another critic remarked that my book was perhaps the most influential novel ever published, a verbal earthquake, an ink and paper tidal wave. If it had not been for Christian influence, I never would have written this book. I became an abolitionist because of my conversion. My Christian background helped me to see the value of human life and the need to protect its sanctity, a truth that led me into the work of abolition. In my later years, I moved to Connecticut, where I went on to write many more works, averaging about 1 book a year. These included The Key to Uncle Tom's Cabin, which I wrote to summarize the stories on which I had based my famous novel. I also published some religious poems, in addition to a number of essays on social living. Even so, none of them were nearly as impactful as Uncle Tom's Cabin,